All right. Welcome, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. We are talking about uncovering untapped talent, what helps women career switchers see cybersecurity as a realistic path. So my name is Holly Schneider-Brown. I am Senior Director with the Center for Cyber Safety and Education, and I also head up research and data with 50 by 50. And I am joined today by Francesca Bosco, whom I will introduce actually a little bit later in the program. So we have a short time, but we're going to pack a lot in today. There are several sections we're going to go through. First of all, we have some slides right now that I will present on the Global 50 by 50 initiative, as well as learning cycle number 2. Then we're going to turn off the slides and we are going to have a moderated discussion with Francesca, which I am really looking forward to. And finally, in the last 15 minutes, we will have Q&A and a closing. So please make sure to put your questions into the chat, either for Francesca or myself, and we will cover them at that time. All right, so let's get into it. The Global 50 by 50 initiative. Now, I know a number of you on this call today already are well aware of it, but for those of you who aren't, just wanted to bring you up to speed. This is our global movement to increase women's representation in cybersecurity to 50% by the year 2050. And the reason for that is because we're currently at less than 25% of the cybersecurity workforce worldwide. In some parts of the world, that's even less. And even though there's lots of activities going on, there are organizations, individuals who are working to increase that representation, still progress has slowed. And so we need to take a different approach. That's why we are banding together with organizations that this is their focus, this is what they're working on, so we can achieve collective impact. The idea is that we can learn faster together to achieve forward progress. And so this initiative has just gotten started. We launched it last year. First, we started by gathering a global task force together, regional working groups, to really start to build what exactly 50 by 50 is. And we launched that last year at ISC2's Security Congress conference in October. Now, we have a number of organizations that we are working with that are our current presenting partners. You can see they range from Australia to Ghana to Europe to North America. We really span the gamut. If your organization is not here and you're interested in being part of 50 by 50, please let us know, because we certainly are still looking for more presenting partners. Okay, so this is a little bit of an overview of 50 by 50. And now we're going to go into learning cycles. So learning cycles are really a pilot effort to harness the power of this coalition that we're building. The idea is that we start with one shared learning question. We focus on one part because we're thinking about the whole journey. This is a long-term thing, 2050, 50% women by 2050. Some of those women are children right now. We are looking at everything from youth to post-secondary students to career switchers, entry level, all the way up to senior level professionals. So it's a broad scope, but the idea is that we pick, for a time-bound experiment, pick one shared learning question to really focus on. And we're going to get into specifics in the next few slides, but I'm giving you the sort of the abstract here, the concept of the learning cycles. So the idea here is to bring together experiences from practitioners around the world and give them a way to share what they're learning, what they're doing that's relevant to the question, and share those learnings that otherwise might just remain local with them or be lost. There might not be a way to share that, especially when we're talking about individuals who may be doing things, not just organizations. So we're surfacing those lessons, but another really important thing is because we're going to gather these various experiences together, we will be able to spot patterns in what practitioners are learning. And that really doesn't exist right now. So this is the experiment we are trying. What it will then lead to is a report that we share with the global community with practical approaches. So when we've seen with the evidence we've collected, what are these patterns of what seems to work well, what might not work as well, what should we continue to test and adapt? So, with the idea being that we build the cybersecurity community's collective memory of what can help move us forward. All right, so let's make this a little more concrete. So we tried this first earlier this year with our pilot learning cycle number 1, which was about youth. So we're talking about children, K to 12, school age children, career awareness and navigation. And the question, the central learning question was, what helps youth to learn more about cybersecurity careers and see themselves in them? So again, the brand new thing, we're throwing this out into the universe. We got 92 individuals and organizations that registered. Of those, we received 15 reports of activities, and there were certainly a lot more folks who wanted to participate, but just weren't able to this first round. And of those activities that were in the reports, those reached 537 young people. So what we did was we took those reports, we analyzed them, spotted those patterns. We created a written report, which if you haven't seen it yet, there's a reason for that. We have first circulated it to those who participated in the learning cycle, as well as our partners. We are going to be launching it publicly within the next week or so. So you'll be able to read it. We've got lots of information in there. But just to give you a little overview of some of the patterns and recurring lessons that we learned was that there were a few key elements of activities that seemed to work better than other things. And so some of those were helping youth to connect with real people in cybersecurity, as well as making different kinds of career pathways visible using relatable real world examples, etc. So the report is going to show you what those things are and give you some practical tips. That's really great for any organization or individual worldwide who might be interested in doing something similar. You know, we recognize nobody has all the resources they need, whether it's money, time, volunteers, etc. So we want to help speed up that learning curve and so that you can use the resources you have most effectively. Okay, so why are we here today? We are going to be talking about career switchers and how they really are an untapped talent. And we'll get into that more with Francesca. But I just wanted to give you sort of the basics of how how we're going to explore this with learning cycle number 2. So we formed an advisory group a few months ago, brought together people from all over the world with relevant experience, whether they were career switchers themselves or worked with career switchers, to really think about what are some unanswered questions? Like what would be really helpful to know? And what this group converged on was the question of what helps women with work experience in other fields see cybersecurity as a career they could realistically pursue. So this group really felt that there was a dearth of information about, what causes the light bulb moments from somebody just thinking, oh, maybe that's like something I could pursue to no, yes, this is something that I could pursue. And the group created a framework really of 3 important shifts, which are fit, and that is, recognizing that your skills and experience have value in cybersecurity, belonging, which is actually being able to see oneself in cyber, and then finally having a concrete next step of what to do. That those are 3 critical things in making that move from considering to actually pursuing. But we don't know at this point really what are the kinds of activities that really help move that needle. So that's what we want to try to find out with this learning cycle. And so right now we are soliciting individuals and organizations who either are already doing or are considering doing, planning on doing activities that are relevant to this. So the activity, basically, it just needs to be something that is for people who are not currently in cybersecurity, but are considering moving in. So it is, just to clarify what it's not, we're not talking about people who are already in the cybersecurity profession. We are not talking about people who are just graduating, who are looking to get an entry-level position. That's actually something else we're going to be talking about in learning cycle number 3. This one is for those who are already in the workforce, but in some other field. And so the activities that could be considered as part of a learning cycle activity could be an event, it could be a workshop, it could be a networking session. Really, there's so many different possibilities. And also in terms of what it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a large program or something that's run by an NGO or some other organization. It also does not have to be designed exclusively for women. It's fine if it's for everyone. It doesn't have to be expensive or highly resourced. In fact, we would love it. We're especially looking for things that don't require a lot of resources. And it doesn't have to be a brand new activity either. So small and informal things can definitely teach us. All right, so how do you do it? First things first is we need you to register. And so there's a QR code here. Once you register, you'll get more information. You'll get a link to the reporting form. And also you can always ask us questions about anything, but that'll get you into our learning cycle ecosystem if you just register. So after that, you are going to do your activity. So again, probably an activity you've already planned, you've already gotten in the calendar for the next few months. Although if you have an activity that you just finished within the last few months, you can submit that as well. We provide a 3-question participant poll that we ask you to use before and after the activity, because what that's going to do is help us capture any movement and change on those questions of fit, belonging, and next step. I do want to note, if you are not able to do that participant poll, that's not a reason to not participate. It's fine. We would like to get the other data you have, because after you've completed the activity, you'll share what you learned, complete a short report that we've created. We've tried to keep this as low lift as possible, so it should only take you about 20 minutes to complete. And that the reports need to be submitted by November 1st. But keep in mind, you do need to register beforehand. So definitely, even if you're not sure if you'll be able to do it, register. And then we will collect reports by November 1st. We will analyze them, and we will have that learnings report where we've aggregated everything and found the patterns. We're going to share that out then. We'll share it out certainly with the participants before the end of this year. The public release will probably be in early 2027. But one other thing, just before we move on to the next section, that I want to stress is that this is not an evaluation. This is not a competition. We're not saying, oh, you did a good job, you didn't do a good job. Not at all. In fact, we want to learn if something didn't go well, please let us know. Let us know, what didn't work out, because that is really valuable information that would be great for other organizations, other individuals around the world to know. Okay, so now that's a very quick overview. We are going to move on now to our moderated discussion, and then we will have time for questions at the end. But it is my pleasure now to introduce Francesca Bosco. She is an international expert and strategic advisor working at the intersection of cybersecurity, digital resilience, emerging technologies, and digital governance. She has more than 2 decades of experience working in leadership roles across the UN, the World Economic Forum, and civil society, including Protect.ngo. She's spent her career helping institutions understand how emerging technologies reshape security environments, translating technical developments into policy implications, and building partnerships among governments, international organizations, the private sector, and civil society. Most recently, she has joined the Center Board of Trustees as one of our newest trustees, and she was an incredibly influential member of our advisory group for Learning Cycle number 2. So she had a big hand in what we created. More than that, I mean, she's just such an awesome person. I love talking with her. I always learn something when I talk with Francesca. She is a true global thought leader on cybersecurity, so please follow her on LinkedIn. But with that, I am going to end the slideshow. Whoops, sorry. Where am I? There we go. Okay, here we are. And it is my pleasure to welcome Francesca. Hello.
Hello, and I mean, no pressure. We haven't agreed to do this presentation actually in the introduction, but thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to everyone joining us.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Francesca, let's start this off with why is this question, which is what helps women career switchers see cybersecurity as a realistic path? Why is this so important right now?
Thank you so much, and a little bit of like kind of like welcoming participants, but specifically, I'm particularly pleased to be part of this conversation because I think in a way, the question behind the learning cycle number 2 that you very well explained, in a way is, I call it deceptively simple, meaning that we're asking what helps women who have already built careers, basically in other fields, or see cybersecurity as something they could realistically pursue. But underneath that question, I do believe there's a much bigger issue, and it's a question about how we define talent and also ultimately about whether cybersecurity is capable of recognizing talent that does not arrive with the cybersecurity label attached to it. And I think your question is very much spot on because this question is so important in this moment for 3 reasons. And I mean, the cybersecurity warfare's conversation, I would say, in itself is changing. For years, we largely, I would say, framed the problem as a shortage of people, right? So we need more cybersecurity professionals. Allow me to simplify here. But several workforce studies, and notably the IC Square, for example, workforce study, points to something that is more nuanced, I would say, meaning that we started discussing much more about critical or significant skills, and instead of like necessarily just thinking about the number of people, but also thinking more about which are the skills that are currently reported as relevant for skill shortages, for example, rather than simply insufficient headcounts. This changed the question. If we need particular capabilities, we should not only ask how do we train more people, but we also need to think where do those capabilities already exist, and this is where I think that career switchers become particularly interesting. The second reason I also, so from headcounts to skills relevance. The second point that I would say is that cybersecurity itself is becoming a much broader profession. We are increasingly needing people who can work across the technology, obviously, but I mean, and we know this very well. This is the first time that we're mentioning this, and most probably will be recurring. AI, obviously, risk, governance, regulation, privacy, supply chains, human behavior. For example, I saw already some very interesting exchanges in the chat, communication, or for example, also organizational resilience. So I think alongside technical capabilities, hiring managers identify problem solving, let me think about it, like a teamwork, or for example, collaboration, communication among the leading, I would say, non-technical skills they need. So this is very important. A person that already have 10 or 15 years of experience in another domain becomes highly valuable in a cybersecurity context as well. And then the third reason is gender, right? So, I mean, and this is why we frame it specifically in this way, meaning that we know, I mean, the percentages, I mean, are slightly, I would say, improving every year, but still, I think that the latest IC Square report from 2025 is reporting that women currently represent only about 22% of the
Mhm.
overall cybersecurity workforce. So I would say that the gender gap starts well before people enter the profession, and this is also why it's so important to focus also, I would say, on the cybersecurity career pathway. I remember, I mean, you mentioned that I work at the World Economic Forum. I encourage everyone to read both the skills report, but also the global gender gap, because is constantly showing basically that, for example, women account for only 31% of enrollment in online networks and cybersecurity courses, for example. So we have a pipeline problem. And I don't think that the answer is simply let's get more women to study cybersecurity. It's much more complex than that. We also need to look at the people who are already in the workforce. And I mean, allow me to say there are women who have already built substantial professional capital, lawyers, project managers, policy professionals, educators, or military personnel, for example, who might have the capabilities that are highly relevant to cybersecurity, but they do not necessarily recognize themselves basically as potential cybersecurity professional. And so I really, and this is why I'm very pleased about this learning cycle too, because it's we need to ask ourselves what helps us someone move from I don't see myself in cybersecurity to I can see how my experience applies here, and I can see what I could do next.
Exactly. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges then with getting these folks actually into cybersecurity?
Several, but let me try to be brief here, and I'm also eager to hear about, let's say, the experience that we might have among the participants. I think to me, one of the first big problem is a translation problem, meaning that a career switcher might have highly relevant capabilities, but the languages of cybersecurity still can make those capabilities invisible on one hand and can create a sort of like, let's say, barrier when it comes to, we always say, speaking the same language, right? So
Mhm.
take a lawyer, for example. A lawyer can have experience in regulatory interpretation, investigation, risk, governance. I'm a lawyer myself. I call myself a recovering lawyer. But the problem is that if the person searches for cybersecurity jobs, for example, and I mean, basically you encounter a sort of like a wall of terminology around like cloud security, vulnerability management, the threat detection. And so the immediate conclusion, and again, I can speak for myself and I can also speak for many people that I've been mentoring and coaching throughout my career, is I don't have the right background.
Mhm.
And the irony is that cybersecurity already has tools designed to, I mean, basically to help solve this problem. I'm thinking about the NIST for the NICE framework, for example, that explicitly separates work roles from job titles. And this is extremely important because I think it's important to start describing cybersecurity work through tasks, for example, through knowledge and skills. Or I always quote it as a very good example, the CISA's cyber career roadmap that and I mean really encourage everyone to have a look at, because in a way it goes further, meaning that it allows people, including non-cyber professionals, to explore relationship, for example, between work roles, shared skill sets, and also potential, in a way, on ramps and off ramps. So
Mhm.
I think these are important development. The question that a framework cannot, in a way, answer by itself is, can I see myself in this?
Mhm.
And so this is the second challenge that I see. So the first one is language. The second one is what I would call the pathway plausibility, meaning someone may understand that cybersecurity has a governance or risk roles, but they still need to know what role could I realistically target? What do I already have? I can give you, an honest example. At a certain point, when I wanted to move after many years at the UN, for example, working specifically not only in acquiring the competencies needed from a lawyer, let's say, to a cybersecurity professional, but at the same time also dealing a lot with, for example, with projects designing, project management, then also some management skills because I was also head of units. So with this sort of like portfolio of skills, I remember talking with a lot of like cybersecurity leaders that were in my networks, and they were like, well, if I hire you, which would be your role? And it was challenging for me because I was like, how
Mhm.
can I explain this? And
Mm.
this is also bringing me to the third point that I would say in terms of challenge is the employer side recognition, meaning it's particularly important. At that time, when I was experiencing this, I was always like, if I could, let's say, have 20 minutes of these like a CISO's or CEO's time would be amazing because I can explain. But the problem is that I do believe that the burden cannot sit entirely within the career switcher. If employers continue to screen primarily for previous cybersecurity job titles, for example, or like
Mhm.
conventional degrees or a narrow set, I would say, of technical credentials, we can tell people to transfer their skills indefinitely, but without basically changing who actually gets hired. And
Mhm.
so I think, I again, my lived experience and also again working a lot with women that are interested both, let's say, in pursuing directly this career, but also potentially switch their careers. I think employers started recognizing this, um, but the internal mobility is also a sort of like a real cybersecurity talent strategy that should be pursued. The sometimes I think we need to understand if we could move, for example, within an organization, someone who already understands, for example, the organization in itself, the risk, the customers, regulation or operations, how this person could develop, for example, the cybersecurity capabilities we need. So
Mhm.
it's a matter both of the employers, looking inside the actual workforce, but also potentially acquiring a workforce that might not be, let's say, the sort of like the usual talent. I know that we call the webinar Untapped, but I often say, we have so many, let's say, unusual, I would
Mm.
say, cyber talent out there. And this is definitely an untapped potential.
Excellent. So what do you think then or what do you hope the cybersecurity ecosystem will learn from this learning cycle?
I would say that, I'm a very practical and, let's say, very down to earth person. So I would say I would frame the ambition carefully, meaning we are not trying to identify one magic intervention, right? So
Right.
this very, let's say, short talk, I wanted to give also, the idea of the complexity of the ecosystem, and also the fact that the ecosystem again is too diverse for that. So what works for a military connected community, for example, might not work for a mid-career lawyer in Europe. What works for a large multinational might not work for an NGO, a university, or a small employer. So what we want to understand is something that is more useful in my view. So I think we want to focus much more on the mechanism that appear to help career switchers across particular points of friction and under
Mhm.
what conditions. So to me, what we should, let's say, look at in terms of outcomes are first the fit. So can someone recognize that capabilities they already possess have value in cybersecurity? So moving from the example that I made before, I have no cybersecurity experience into I have experience in regulatory risk, investigation, governance, and I can see where those capabilities map onto cybersecurity work. So the first is fit, the second is belonging. So can people see themselves as someone who could actually succeed in the field? So this is where, for example, role models and exposure become extremely important. So I don't think role models necessarily have to be senior executives, for example. For career switchers, someone who says, I was a lawyer 5 years ago, and this is how I moved into cyber. Recently it happened to me with a couple of people, one working on communication and another one working on marketing. With marketing experience that moved into cyber. And this would be, in my view, much more useful than a CISO necessarily describing their career from the top. So, having a more diversified narrative, and it makes the pathway much more tangible. And then the third is action. So, does the person know what to do next? I think you already gave some very good, let's say, suggestions describing the learning cycle and what the community can do. But I also really believe it's important to speak to someone in the field, undertaking a targeted course, doing a practical project. For example, start taking on cybersecurity responsibilities in the current role might help. Applying for an internal mobility opportunity, finding a mentor, or, for example, applying for apprenticeship or internship, even, let's say, outside the comfort zone, I would say. And this is why, to me, I really believe that the learning cycle gives a better understanding of the sequence between awareness, so I understand the issue, into action. And this is where I think we should really focus on what changes the behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you put that. We are getting towards the end of our session. So before we go into Q&A, just wanted to ask you, Francesca, for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I would follow on what I was saying in terms of, like, first, let's say, being a very practical hands-on, but also on the second point, about the fact that I think many, I would say the predominant narrative that we see out there, and rightfully so, is in providing successful examples, successful stories. We also need to understand what does not work. And this is why I love working with the center, and notably with you, Holly, because we are very much thinking about what can meaningfully, let's say, move the needle, right, and change the behavior. So I think it's extremely important, because if someone participates in a program and subsequently decides not to pursue, for example, a cybersecurity career, that should not be considered a program failure, for example. It might tell us that the pathway was unrealistic, the financial position did not work, the employer expectation were too high, the training was too technical, the person discovered that cybersecurity was not for them. So I think it's very much also important to create a sort of, like, space for what I would call useful learning. And I think if we systematically capture also those experiences, we move from collecting success stories, let's say, to build an actual learning system. And this is where I think, this is my, I know it doesn't sound necessarily a sort of, like, happy or positive last thought, but it's a very concrete one. And I hope a constructive one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Francesca. Okay, we are now on to the Q&A phase. I see there's been a lot of conversation here in the chat. Unfortunately, I'm not able to just read all of it. There's just been so much. I'll have to look at it afterwards, but I'd like to invite everyone to put specific questions into the chat that you may have either about in general, about career switchers, or about the learning cycle and what you need to do. Oh, yes, Francesca.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something because I saw one of the comments from Scott
Yeah.
at the let's say a little bit at almost where at the beginning of the session, and I think it's extremely relevant and let's say very close to my heart, meaning that I do be so the point that Scott was making was about, let's say, rather than establishing and grow women specific groups, focusing on increasing basically female membership in mainstream organization. And I have to say it's an extremely valid point, and I lived it, let's say, myself, being often the let's say both very much involved into women for cyber, women in cyber, and similar initiatives, but also at the same time often representing, for example, the let's say the gender quota
Mm.
in some other fields, notably because I've been working throughout all my career into, let's say, often heavily dominated, male dominated fields. I'm thinking about security, I'm thinking about cyber, and so on and so forth. I would like to share my honest thinking about this. I agree that the objective should ultimately be mainstreaming women's participation across the cybersecurity ecosystem rather than creating parallel structures that remain disconnected basically from the broader field. We need women represented in institutions, professional associations, technical communities, for example, leadership pipelines and decision-making spaces that shape cybersecurity as a whole. At the same time, I would not see women-specific network as competing with that objective. I think they can serve, in my experience at least, a very practical function. So creating peer support, for example, visibility, sponsorship, and also access to networks that women might not otherwise have, particularly at points where participation or progression remains, allow me to say, uneven. So for me, the strongest model is therefore both and, meaning use targeted communities to address specific barriers, like what we're doing here, for example, and build the confidence and networks, while actively ensuring that those women move into and are visible within the mainstream organization and leadership structures of the field, basically. So I just wanted to mention this because I mean it's a topic that is very, let's say, close to my heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Let me see. There's a question here about how do you draw boundaries for cybersecurity? And I'm not sure if that's like defined because I again haven't seen the whole conversation here. And I know Chanel said it's not exclusionary. If anything, it's about inclusion. Anything you want to say, Francesca, just about boundaries and cybersecurity? I don't know if it's defining what we mean by cybersecurity or what is a cybersecurity role.
Um, I think there's okay, that's a very interesting question because I think there are two dimensions. One is I would draw the boundary around, in a way, the security objective, not around a particular technology or discipline. Meaning,
Mhm. Yeah.
to me, cybersecurity is, I mean, without going into the CIA triad, but I mean, it's much more, cybersecurity is the protection, I would say, and resilience, which is extremely key in cybersecurity, of system, networks, data, and the people and institution that depends on them against, I mean, obviously the risk that is arising from the digital environment. So, I mean, people, process, and technology, obviously, and obviously there are different layers, meaning that the core domain, which is protecting confidentiality, integrity, availability, and the authenticity and resilience of the digital systems, infrastructure, and data. Then I would say enabling disciplines that you have, like the usual ones. So I would say computer science, engineering, and so on and so forth, but then also the human and societal dimension. And I'm glad that also in the chat, for example, there was, if I'm not mistaken, for example, psychology mentioned, behavior, leadership, economics. So I would say that this a sort of like in a way, this ecosystem to me is where I would draw the boundary. At the same time, I think it's important. So on one hand, it's a sort of like, I wanted to mention the three layers to explain that to me, cybersecurity is not simply, let's say, it doesn't have just a technical dimension. At the same time, I think it's important that we are clear on the fact that interdependence does not mean that everything becomes a cybersecurity. So I think it's important because I would like to see still, let's say, an increasing professionalization in a way of the field. And I do believe that understanding the technical language and, let's say, putting some efforts in understanding what cybersecurity means in practice is extremely relevant. So I would move away from the hype of putting, let's say, the cyber label into everything and stick to, the very practical dimension of it.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we are just about at time, so I am going to just pull up the slides again so we can share here we go. Oops. Okay. Um, Here we go. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca. Really appreciate all of your insights here. We appreciate all the insights from the folks in the chat. Just given the structure of the webinar and our time limits, we're not able to dive into everything on this particular call. But I would like everyone to please consider being part of the learning cycle number 2. With career switchers, again, you can scan this code to register to be part of learning cycle number 2 and contribute your activity. We will have future learning cycles. We are currently working on assembling the advisory group for learning cycle number 3, which will be about that transition from post-secondary education into an entry-level cybersecurity career. So there's lots coming up, lots of ways you can get involved. We ask you if you can share this with your network, encourage folks to be part of this. And finally, just wanted to say, there we go. Thank you. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And we are just truly grateful for your being part of this. We will share the recording later on. But thank you so much, Francesca. It was wonderful to spend time with you today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye, all.